Welcome to Bone2Pick, Hip-BoneMusic's Artist of the Month interview series. And we're really pleased to be in Hollywood, California today to interview our featured artist, Bill Reichenbach. And for my money, Bill Reichenbach is the greatest bass trombone player of all time. An amazingly talented gentleman who plays tenor trombone, euphonium, tuba, contrabass trombone, bass trombone, you name it. Also a brilliant composer and arranger and conductor. Bill is originally from Washington, D.C., moved to Los Angeles in 1975, and has since gone on to be, as near as I could tell, the most recorded trombone player of all time. And we're really happy that Bill allowed us into his home today and get a chance to get his insights and hear about his amazing career. Thanks so much for having us today, Bill. It's great for us to be here.
Thanks for being here, yeah.
Bill, what was it like studying with the legendary Emery Remington at the Eastman School of Music?
Well, it was probably pretty much like a religious experience, really, in all the positive ways. You know, all the students at the time, and he had about 32 students at any given time at the school. He had a full schedule. Everybody was so into what he was doing. You know, his whole system of playing and his personality and all that. You know, you got there and you were part of it instantly, and you either went with it, or every once in a while there was a couple of guys that didn't, but most of the time you just went with it. Like for my audition, I showed up for my audition and I met him, and he greeted me like an old friend, because my teacher, Bob Isley, had been one of his students back in the 30s. And then he sang all of my stuff with me while I was trying to play it, and I thought, he's singing so loud he can't even hear me. So it totally relaxed me. I got real relaxed, I played comfortably, and it was real easy, and every moment in the studio with him was spectacular.
That's great. Your dad was a great drummer in the Washington, D.C. area where you grew up. What influence did he have on you as a young, developing musician?
Well, a lot. He never discouraged me about. I thought I wanted to be a musician pretty young, you know, and I started out playing drums when I was about 4 years old, and I used to go to rehearsals with him. I enjoyed being around musicians, and he started talking about music like I was a grown-up. Like, I remember him one time when we were going down to a rehearsal downtown. I was standing up on the seat of the car. I was that small, and he's telling me that if you're going to play Body and Soul, you have to play it in D-flat. I remember that from about age 5. Now, why was he telling me that? I don't know. But so when I was like 10 years old, getting up to my next birthday, he says, I'll give you a choice for your birthday. You can either get a camera or I'll get you a trombone. And I thought, oh, I really want a trombone. I don't know why, except that I thought that trombones were kind of funny. And as it turns out, they are. So
That's great. You spent the better part of a year touring with Buddy Rich in 1972. And when I got on the band in 1983, I was already a big Bill Reichenbach fan, and I asked him about you, and he raved about you, and he didn't rave about anybody. So I took that as a very good sign. What are your memories of playing on Buddy's band, and also that great feature that you played on the tune Wave?
Well, first of all, the ensemble on Buddy's band was a very certain kind of ensemble, because he played everybody's parts in one way or the other. So it was like a picture where every element of the picture is outlined by a fine, dark line. It's clear. Everything was clear. There was no choice about where you would play anything. So you went with his time feel, which, for, you know, whether you object to that or not, it created an exciting ensemble, and the ensemble learned how to play together, and learning how to trust all the other musicians to play. That's how you learn ensemble anyway. You learn to trust everybody and you play. And he drove the ensemble in a certain way. His whole approach to it was that. He wanted it to line up on him, and it did, and it worked that way for what it was, you know. The Wave arrangement was actually written for John Lays, who preceded me on the band and then quit for what turned out to be just the time that I was on the band, and then he came back just in time for me to record the solo that was written for him, you know. And we got into, and you know, I remember the first night I played it, I had been playing a lot of small jazz combo rhythm section kind of stuff in Rochester with some friends, and you know, I was kind of experimenting with the way I put time feel on things, and I started playing wave with sort of a very free rhythmic thing, and at the end of that song, he called a break, and he walked by me and he says, "If you don't learn how to play with some time, you'll never get to play that song again." So I had to figure out what he meant by playing with time and restructure the approach, the rhythmic approach that I used to play that song. And so after I figured it out, and then he decided that he liked it.
Yeah, that sounds like something he'd say.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
You moved to Los Angeles in 1975, and looking back on it now, what thoughts and feelings did you have as your career started to develop back then?
Well, my first thought was I hoped that my $1,200 that I had in my pocket and my unemployment wouldn't run out at the same time. But I was able, through people that I had met, I came out a couple of times before that and did a couple of albums with Chuck Mangione over at A&M Records, and I met some fantastic musicians. I met Vince DeRosa, the great French horn player, and Kai Winding, and made some friends with people my age, and so there was like a path. I moved out and lived with a friend of mine named Mayo Tiana. He still remains a great friend of mine. He's in Chicago now, and I lived with him and his family for 10 weeks. And I played on his rehearsal band, and I met all those people. And then Bruce Paulson had to leave Toshiko's band, and so I went in to take his place on playing second trombone on Toshiko's band. And then Toshiko's band started playing around a little bit, and it was kind of like this super big band. And so it was like getting featured in that part of the business, you know, like the jazz thing. And back then, the connection between the jazz people and the studio people was closer than it is now, because the legit side of things is more prevalent now.
Your work in association with Jerry Hay, I'm a huge fan of both of you guys, and I would say it's one of the most fruitful and productive trumpet-trombone partnerships that has ever existed. What are your memories of how the relationship between you guys started and developed into what it did?
When I first heard Jerry Hay, it was when he was subbing on Toshiko's band for Bobby Shue, playing lead trumpet. We went up to San Francisco, I think, to play a concert somewhere, and Bobby couldn't make it. He was somewhere else. So they found this young guy, Jerry Hay, who was playing with a band called Sea Wind, which I was unfamiliar with. And he came in and played incredibly difficult lead trumpet book and just played the heck out of it. I mean, he sounded so good on the high notes, and he was able to conceptualize the music with very little runway, you know. And so right after that, I started orchestrating Rich Man, Poor Man, the television show I was orchestrating for this composer that I went to school with named Mike Isaacson. And I had the opportunity to bring some players onto that show that I wanted to try. So I got Jerry to come in, and that was his first job at Universal. And a few months after that, he started getting calls for the Sea Wind horn section to do what at the time were kind of Christian pop things. They were doing a lot of that stuff back then. And Sea Wind had sort of like a partially Christian vibe to it a little bit, you know, the lyrics of the tunes and everything. And so they didn't have a trombone player. So he asked me to do these record dates with them, and we started doing these record dates together and figuring out phrasing so that we would all play together and marking all the notes and everything, and it just kind of went from there, you know.
And you know, when I look back in the 80s as a fan and starting my career and following you guys, it seemed like every record I picked up had your guys' great horn section, which included obviously yourself and Jerry and Chuck Finley and Gary Grant, Charlie Loper, Lou McCreary. The personnel seemed to fluctuate a bit, but the core of it seemed to be those guys. I mean, once it, can you talk about what it was like at the kind of the apex of that section when you guys were just constantly busy? It seemed like you must have been recording every day, multiple sessions a day.
We went through periods like that when we would be in the studio one way or the other most of the day and late into the evening, you know, early into the morning sometimes. And It could be just four horns, which would have been probably Jerry and Gary Grant and me and maybe Larry Williams or another saxophone player. And then maybe then it would grow sometimes to be three trumpets and two or three trombones, and all those other guys that you mentioned would be there. And we got to the place where it was like a brass quintet that had been playing together for years. You didn't even have to think about what anybody else was doing. So that whole issue of trust, where you get when you're playing on a road band for months and months and you play with the same guys every night, we were able to build that up in the studios where we knew how the phrasing was going to work without talking about it after a while. And it just got natural. And you can play real strong that way, and you can get into where the time feel is, and really, like, you can be totally committed to it that way. And that was probably one of the differences with the way that group sounded, because everybody was so comfortable with one another, they could be totally committed.
Mm-hmm. Interesting, very interesting. With regards to playing in a horn section, to my ear, you understand the role of the trombone better than anybody, and you have specifically have an ability to make the trumpet sound great. Albeit you're working with Gary and Jerry and Chuck, who happen to be quite good on their own right. But can you talk about, maybe just talk briefly about how you approach supporting the trumpets, how you approach making the horn section sound so cohesive?
Well, part of it is sound, and coming from Eastman and having that whole concept of a sound being sort of a big sound rather than an intentionally bright sound gives you a little bit of leeway. When you start to add octane to that, you have a big sound to start with. It's coming out like this, and then if you're going to be bright with that kind of sound, it's sizable. It can be sizable. So that was that, and all of those trumpet players are sort of big trumpet players, like big mouthpiece trumpet players, you know, and full-size Bach trumpets, not the small bore trumpets. They were playing medium or medium-large, you know. So everybody was kind of getting what would be kind of like almost a legit sound on the horn to start with, you know, and then phrasing. I always had a tendency to phrase on tenor trombone like a lead trumpet player. The same kind of crescendos and cutoffs and all of that kind of stuff. So it just naturally fit with when you're playing third trumpet with those guys, kind of, in a way. You know, then you have to blend with the saxes. That's a little different. But when you're with the trumpets, then that's kind of, and the saxes are joining. Then they have to play with the trumpets too. Everybody, it's a big colored trumpet section, kind of, and you'd have to think about it that way.
Yeah, I really feel like for myself, I learned a lot. Just even though I didn't know you back then, just hearing you on record, it gave me a real solid idea of how to approach playing in the section like that. Who would you say are your biggest influences, both tenor trombone playing and bass trombone playing?
Well, I guess on tenor trombone, thinking about it in a jazz context, it would be Frank Russolino and J.J. Johnson, and you know, talking about my influences when I was starting and trying to figure out how to play. You know, a lot of influences now. You know, you're one of my influences. There's you know, I try to be influenced by all of the players that I play with that I like. You know, I try to learn what they're doing, and I try to understand it and be able to respond to it and add that to my whole stylistic vocabulary. Now on bass trombone, of course George Roberts is kind of like the first influence that most bass trombone players who are now living had. Another guy who played with George a lot in L.A. was Kenny Schroyer. He also went to Eastman years ago. So I liked, when I heard Kenny play, it was kind of like, wow, that sound is like, because it was sort of what I believed I wanted to sound like, that coming from Eastman, you know, that he had that, you know. Then as a bass trombone player, I was also very influenced by baritone sax players. Charlie Fawkes, that played baritone sax with the Basie Band for many years, was a big influence on me about how to play bass trombone in a big band. The way he would shape the line so that it sounded like he was adding joy to it as it went down, you know, and the way he landed on low notes and came back up into the section, and the way all of that stuff. I thought that was what a bass trombone was supposed to do.